The smell of Chloe's expensive lavender perfume was still hanging in the air when I found the leather book, hidden inside her vintage hatbox. I expected to find old letters. Instead, I found a handwritten log of the exact moment my parents' bedroom windows shattered in the fire. My best friend didn't just watch my house burn. She lit the match. In exactly 12 minutes, the high-security gates of this estate will lock for the night. And Chloe just texted me 3 words. I see you. She isn't coming home to talk. She's coming to finish what she started 10 years ago. I'm trapped in this house with a permanent limp she gave me, holding a camera that's been recording my sleep since I was 12. You think you know your best friend. You think you're safe in your own skin. But what do you do when the person who's been holding your hand is the one who cut your brakes? Let me take you back to where this began. The afternoon sun sliced through the blinds of Chloe Miller's master bedroom, casting long, jagged shadows that looked like bars across the plush cream carpet. Sarah Johnson's fingers trembled as she reached into the vintage hatbox, the velvet rim rough and cold against her skin. She wasn't supposed to be in here. Chloe was at her yoga retreat in the city. But the silence of the massive Westchester estate felt heavy, like a lung holding its breath, beneath a silk scarf that smelled of cloying lavender and stale air. Sarah's hand brushed against something hard and rectangular. She pulled out a leather-bound journal. The spine cracked with a dry, sharp sound that echoed in the quiet room. Sarah's breath hitched. She flipped the pages, her eyes darting across dates and precise, looped script. Chloe's handwriting. But these weren't diary entries about boys or clothes. They were clinical notations, chemical compositions, accelerants, ignition points, structural vulnerabilities of the old Johnson estate. Sarah's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She reached the entry dated 3 days before the funeral. Curtains in the master wing will catch at 11:14 p.m. Airflow from the hallway will push the heat toward the nursery. The words blurred as Sarah's vision swam. Chloe hadn't rescued Sarah from a tragedy. She had curated a masterpiece of ash. The fire that had claimed Sarah's parents, the fire that had left her with a permanent limp and a mind full of holes, had been a staged performance. Every comforting word Chloe had whispered over the last 20 years was a lie designed to bury the truth under a mountain of fake sympathy. Sarah's movements turned mechanical, driven by a cold, sharp terror. She needed to move. She needed evidence. She clutched the journal to her chest, the leather biting into her skin, and hurried toward the downstairs office. Her right leg dragged slightly, the rhythmic thump hitch of her gait sounding like a ticking clock in the hollow foyer. The office was a shrine to Chloe's success. Mahogany, glass, and the faint scent of expensive vanilla candles. Sarah sat at the desk, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped her phone. She positioned the camera, the shutter clicking rhythmically as she captured every page of the logs. Each snap of the lens felt like a nail in the coffin of their friendship. She wasn't just looking at a secret. She was looking at a roadmap of her own destruction. Next, she reached for the silver flash drive sitting in the bowl on the desk. She jammed it into the port, the metal casing burning hot against her palm as the blue light began to blink. She navigated the directories with a designer's precision, looking for anything that didn't belong. She found a folder labeled Insurance Assets. Inside were documents revealing Chloe's signature on offshore accounts she shouldn't have known existed. But it was the file at the bottom that stopped Sarah's heart. A scanned copy of a Yale acceptance letter addressed to Sarah from 10 years ago. It had been altered. The accepted had been stamped over with a forged, rejected seal. Chloe hadn't just stolen Sarah's past. She had strangled her future before it could even begin. The hum of the computer fan filled the silence, a low drone that grated on Sarah's nerves. She watched the progress bar crawl across the screen, her knuckles bleaching white as she gripped the edge of the desk. She was a prisoner in a life Chloe had carefully constructed, a doll in a house of glass. She pulled the drive as soon as the light turned solid, shoving it into the pocket of her paint-stained sweater. A heavy, melodic chime echoed through the house, the front doorbell. Sarah froze. Her pulse spiked, a frantic drumming in her ears. She checked the time on her digital voice recorder. Office, 2:14 p.m. Someone is at the door. She whispered the words into the device, her anchor to reality. She couldn't afford a dissociative gap now, not when she was so close to the truth. She crept toward the foyer, peering through the sidelight. It was Michael Davis, the neighbor from 2 houses down. He was holding a stack of mail, his face kind and unsuspecting. Sarah's first instinct was to bolt, to hide in the shadows until he left. But she saw the glint of a lens in the corner of the ceiling. Chloe's security system. If she didn't answer, if she acted strange, Chloe would know something was wrong. Sarah opened the door just a crack. The humid Oregon air rushed in, smelling of wet cedar and mown grass. "Hey, Sarah," Michael said, offering a warm smile. "The mailman left these at my place by mistake. Thought I'd drop them off before the rain starts." Sarah took the envelopes, her fingers brushing his. She wanted to scream, to grab his arm and tell him everything. But she knew the cameras were recording her every move. She looked into Michael's eyes, trying to project a silent, screaming plea for help. She widened her eyes, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "Thanks, Michael," she said, her voice brittle. I'm just finishing some work. Chloe will be back soon." She lingered for a second too long, her gaze darting toward the security camera and then back to him. Michael's smile faltered. He noticed the tremor in her hand, the way she was clutching the stack of mail like a shield. "You okay, Sarah? You look a little pale." "Just a headache," she lied, the words tasting like copper in her mouth. "I need to lie down. Thanks again." She closed the door before he could respond, the heavy oak thudding into place. She leaned her forehead against the wood, her heart hammering. She had tried to signal him, but had it been enough? Or had she just alerted Chloe that the careless child was finally waking up? The house felt different now. The silence was no longer empty. It was predatory. Sarah turned to head back to the office to grab her bag, but a floorboard creaked in the hallway behind her. It wasn't the house settling. It was a deliberate, heavy step. Sarah spun around. A figure stood at the end of the long corridor, framed by the shadows of the staircase. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark hoodie and a plastic medical mask that obscured his features. He didn't say a word. He just started walking toward her. "Who are you?" Sarah's voice cracked. She gripped her orthopedic cane, the cold metal handle biting into her palm. The man didn't answer. He lunged. Sarah didn't think. She reacted. As he swung a heavy arm toward her head, she dropped low, her limp making the movement awkward but effective. She swung the base of her cane with everything she had, catching the man squarely across the shins. He let out a muffled grunt and stumbled. Sarah scrambled toward the kitchen, her breath hitching in her chest. The smell of scorched dust filled the air as she shoved a heavy chair into the man's path. She reached the door to the garage, her fingers fumbling with the lock. Behind her, she heard the chair clatter across the linoleum. "Stay away from me!" she shrieked, finally getting the door open. She slammed it shut and threw the bolt just as a heavy weight hit the other side. The wood groaned, but held. Sarah leaned against the cold metal of Chloe's luxury SUV, her chest heaving. She had the journal. She had the drive. She had the forged Yale letter. She had the truth. But as the man began to pound on the garage door with the force of 1,000 fists, Sarah realized that the truth was only the beginning of the fight. She reached for the remote on the wall to open the main garage door. She needed to get to her car, to the old Volvo she kept in the corner, and drive until the estate was nothing but a memory in the rearview mirror. She pressed the button. Nothing happened. She pressed it again, harder this time, her thumb bruising against the plastic. The red light on the sensor blinked once, twice, and then went dark. A mechanical clack echoed through the rafters. Subverted. Sarah didn't panic. She knew this system. Chloe had bragged about the Smart Shield installation for months, a top-of-the-line security array that could be controlled via an app. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She had the guest access code. She'd used it a dozen times when she'd forgotten her keys. She opened the app, her fingers flying across the glass. Open perimeter gate. Open garage door. The app showed a green check mark. Command sent. Sarah felt a wave of pure, crystalline relief. Her shoulders dropped, and she let out a jagged breath. "Thank God," she whispered. The heavy motorized tracks of the garage door began to hum. The massive slab of steel and wood groaned, lifting an inch, then two. A sliver of gray Oregon daylight spilled across the concrete floor, smelling of rain and freedom. Sarah moved toward her Volvo, keys already in hand. She could see the edge of the driveway, the path to the main road, the way out. She was going to make it. She was smarter than Chloe gave her credit for. The humming sound changed. It went from a smooth drone to a violent, grinding shriek. The garage door slammed shut with the force of a guillotine, the impact vibrating through the concrete and up into Sarah's teeth. The lights in the garage, usually a warm amber, suddenly shifted. They flickered once and turned a deep, blood red. Sarah stared at her phone. The green checkmark was gone. In its place, a video feed opened automatically. It was a high-definition shot of the very room she was standing in. In the corner of the screen, a small text box appeared. Admin override. Chloe. The phone began to vibrate in her hand, a steady, mocking pulse. A message popped up, overlaying the video of Sarah's own terrified face. "I'm coming home early, Sarah. I saw you in the closet. You really shouldn't have looked in the hat box. It's private." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow to the stomach, leaving her breathless. The app hadn't worked because she was clever. It had worked because Chloe had allowed it to work for 3 seconds, just to give her a taste of hope before snatching it away. She wasn't just trapped. She was being toyed with. The remote lock hadn't just engaged on the garage. The entire estate was now a digital cage. Every window, every door, every gate was sealed. The red light bathed the garage in a sinister glow, making the shadows of the tools on the wall look like reaching fingers. Sarah backed away from the door, her phone slipping from her numb fingers and clattering onto the floor. She was trapped in the dark with a monster who could see through the walls. The silence that followed was worse than the pounding. It was the silence of a predator watching a mouse in a maze. Sarah's digital recorder clicked in her pocket. Click, whir. A reminder that time was still moving, even if she felt frozen. Garage. 2:28 p.m. The doors are dead. She knows. She's coming. Sarah forced herself to move. She couldn't stay in the garage. The intruder was still on the other side of the kitchen door. She looked around the cavernous space, her eyes landing on an old moped tucked behind a stack of winter tires. It was a vintage Vespa Chloe kept for the aesthetic, but Sarah knew it ran. She scrambled over to it, her limp causing her to stumble against a rack of garden shears. The metal clattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot. She ignored the pain in her leg and threw a leg over the moped. She reached for the ignition. No key. "Think, Sarah, think," she hissed. She remembered Chloe's father, a man who obsessed over mechanics, showing them how to start it without a key during one of his rare bouts of teaching. You had to pull the wires from the casing and spark them. She ripped the plastic shroud off the steering column, the jagged edges slicing into her fingertips. She found the wires, red and black, like a warning. She pulled them free, her hands slick with sweat. She kicked the starter pedal, her weak leg buckling under the effort. The engine coughed. A plume of blue smoke filled the air, smelling of acrid gasoline. "Come on, come on." She kicked again. The engine sputtered and died. She tried a third time, putting every ounce of her weight into the motion. Her right leg gave out entirely, a sharp, white-hot pain shooting up her hip. She tumbled off the moped, the heavy bike crashing down on top of her. The metal burned against her calf, and she let out a strangled cry. The moped lay hissed on the floor, fuel leaking from the tank in a shimmering rainbow puddle. It was useless. She couldn't balance it with her leg, and she couldn't start it without the strength she'd lost in the fire. The very injury Chloe had caused was now the thing keeping Sarah from escaping her. Above her, the smart speakers in the garage ceiling crackled to life. A low, distorted hum filled the room, gradually coalescing into a melody. Sarah's blood turned to ice. It was Amazing Grace, played on a pipe organ, the exact arrangement from her parents' funeral. The music was too loud, the bass vibrating through the concrete floor and into Sarah's bones. The red security lights began to flicker in time with the music, on, off, creating a disorienting strobe effect. The garage seemed to stretch and shrink with every flash. "Stop it!" Sarah screamed, covering her ears. The music only grew louder. Chloe was mocking her, using her trauma as a weapon. Sarah knew she had to get out of the garage before the intruder found another way in. She crawled toward the small side door that led to the basement stairs. It was a heavy, reinforced door, usually kept locked. But in the chaos of the smart shield reset, the electronic bolt slid back with a metallic thunk. She plunged into the darkness of the basement, the air suddenly dropping 20 degrees. It smelled of damp earth and old insulation. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't want to be a silhouette. She navigated by touch, her hand sliding along the rough stone foundation. Basement. 2:40 p.m., moving toward the crawl space. I can hear the music through the floor. The thump, thump, thump of the funeral march followed her, muffled now, but still persistent. She reached the entrance to the crawl space, a narrow opening behind the furnace. She squeezed inside, the low ceiling pressing against her spine. The dirt was cold and damp, clinging to her sweater. She stopped, holding her breath. A heavy footfall sounded directly above her. Then, the creak of the basement door opening. The intruder was downstairs. Sarah pressed her face into the dirt, the taste of grit on her tongue. She could see the beam of a flashlight sweeping across the basement floor through the gaps in the crawlspace lattice. The light was a cold, surgical white. "I know you're down here, Sarah," a voice whispered. It wasn't the man from earlier. It was a recording of Chloe's voice, broadcast through a hidden speaker in the utility room. "You were always so good at hiding. Like a little mouse. The flashlight beam stopped at the furnace. Sarah saw a pair of heavy work boots move into view. The man was quiet, his breathing rhythmic and slow. He knew she was trapped. Sarah's hand brushed against something hard in the dirt, a heavy pipe wrench left behind by a plumber. She gripped it, the cold iron giving her a sense of grounding. If he came in here, she wouldn't go quietly. The man knelt. The flashlight beam poked into the crawl space, blinding her. Sarah didn't wait. As the man reached a hand inside to grab her, she lunged forward with the wrench. She swung with a primal scream, the heavy tool connecting with the man's knee with a sickening crack. He howled, a guttural sound of pure agony, and fell backward. Sarah didn't stay to see if he got up. She scrambled deeper into the crawl space, her elbows raw and bleeding, until she reached the far end where the utility pipes rose into the house. She pushed her way through a loose panel and emerged into the small, cramped utility room. She was gasping for air, her lungs burning. She leaned against the water heater, the warmth of the tank a sharp contrast to the basement's chill. Her eyes fell on a shelf of old toys Chloe had kept for nostalgia. Right in the center sat a tattered teddy bear with one eye. Sarah's favorite toy from before the fire. She reached out to touch it, a sob rising in her throat. But as her finger brushed the bear's fur, she felt something hard beneath the surface. She turned the bear over. Tucked inside the seams of its neck was a tiny pinhole lens. The realization was a physical nausea. Chloe hadn't just been watching her today. This bear had been in Sarah's bedroom for 10 years. Every private moment, every tear shed, every secret whispered into the dark. It had all been recorded. Chloe had been harvesting Sarah's life like a crop. Sarah's grief vanished, replaced by a white-hot, cleansing rage. She wasn't going to just run. She was going to burn Chloe's world down. She knew where the heart of the house was. The central server room was located in the study, hidden behind a false bookshelf. That was where the footage was stored. That was where the smart shield lived. If she could get there, she could broadcast everything. The journal photos, the Yale forgery, the footage of the intruder, to the local police department's public tip line. She climbed the stairs to the main floor, her limp forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. The house was a nightmare of flickering lights and funeral music. But Sarah moved through it like a ghost. She reached the study and shoved the bookshelf aside. The server room was small and sterile, filled with the hum of cooling fans and the rhythmic blinking of blue and green lights. Sarah sat at the console, her fingers flying across the keys. She didn't need a password. She had watched Chloe type it 1,000 times from the doorway. Safety. "Let's see you hide this," Sarah hissed. She initiated the bypass, her heart leaping as the upload bar appeared on the screen. 5%, 12%, 20%. Outside, the sky turned a bruised purple. A crack of lightning split the air, followed immediately by a roar of thunder that shook the house. The lights in the server room flickered. 35%, 42%. The screen suddenly went black. "No," Sarah whispered. "No, no, no." A massive surge of static hissed through the speakers. The thunderstorm had hit the local substation. The internet connection icon in the corner of the screen turned a mocking red. Connection lost. Sarah pounded her fists on the desk. She was so close. The files were sitting there, tethered to a dead wire. She reached for her phone to tether the connection, but there was no signal. The storm had turned the estate into a dead zone. She was alone. Truly, completely alone. And then, through the window, she saw it. A pair of headlights cutting through the torrential rain. A sleek, black car pulling into the driveway. Chloe was home. The sound of the car engine cutting out was louder than the thunder. Sarah watched the security feed, her breath fogging the glass of the monitor. Chloe stepped out of the car, holding a black silk umbrella. She looked calm, radiant even. She walked toward the front door with the steady, purposeful gait of a woman who owned everything she saw. Sarah scrambled to the server rack, her fingers fumbling with the backup battery switches. "Come on," she prayed. "Just give me 5 minutes." The server hummed back to life, the cooling fan spinning up to a frantic whine. The upload bar reappeared, 42%. It stayed there. The red "no connection" icon pulsed like a dying heart. A sharp click echoed from the foyer, the front door opening. "Sarah?" Chloe's voice drifted up the stairs, melodic and sweet. "Honey, I'm home. I brought those organic peaches you like. The ones without the skin? I know how you hate the texture." Sarah backed into the corner of the server room, clutching the leather journal to her chest. She could hear Chloe's heels clicking on the hardwood. Tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of a predator closing in. "I saw you had a visitor," Chloe continued, her voice getting closer. She was on the stairs now. "Michael Davis is such a gossip, isn't he? He called me, worried about you. He said you looked unstable." Sarah's heart was a trapped bird. She looked at the screen. 42%. The office door creaked open. Chloe stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the red emergency lights of the hallway. She wasn't wearing her yoga clothes anymore. She was in a sharp, gray suit, her hair pulled back into a perfect tight bun. She looked like a judge. "You've been very busy, Sarah," Chloe said, stepping into the room. She didn't look angry. She looked disappointed, which was far more terrifying. "Searching through my things, stealing my data. It's the fire all over again, isn't it? That lack of boundaries, that carelessness." "You killed them," Sarah said, her voice shaking but clear. "You set the fire. I saw the logs, Chloe. I saw the chemistry." Chloe sighed, a soft, patronizing sound. She walked over to the desk and looked at the server screen. "Logs? Oh, Sarah. Those are just my research for the foundation. We're working on fire prevention for low-income housing. You always did have such a vivid imagination. It's part of your trauma. The doctors warned me this might happen." "I have the Yale letter." Sarah spat, holding up the crumpled paper. "You forged the rejection. You stole my life." Chloe's eyes narrowed, the only sign of her true nature. She moved with a speed Sarah didn't expect, crossing the room and grabbing Sarah's wrist. Her grip was like a steel band. "I saved your life," Chloe hissed, her face inches from Sarah's. The smell of lavender oil was overwhelming. "You would have failed at Yale. You were broken, Sarah. You needed me to hold the pieces together. I gave you a home. I gave you a career. And this is how you thank me? By trying to ruin the only person who loves you?" She twisted Sarah's arm, forcing her down onto the desk. Sarah gasped, the edge of the mahogany biting into her ribs. The journal fell to the floor with a heavy thud. "You're going to give me that drive, Sarah," Chloe whispered into her ear. "And then we're going to call the hospital. They have a lovely room for you. Quiet, safe, no more fires." Sarah struggled, her limp making it impossible to gain leverage. She felt Chloe's superior strength pinning her down, a weight she couldn't move. Chloe reached for the flash drive in Sarah's pocket. "I already called the police," Chloe said, her voice returning to that terrifyingly calm lilt. "I told them you were having a breakdown, that you were threatening to hurt yourself. And look at you. You're a mess." scratched, bleeding, delusional. Chloe's hand closed around a decorative silver letter opener sitting on the desk. It was sharp, shaped like a feather, subverted. Sarah saw the weapon and felt a surge of desperate hope. This was it. Chloe was going to attack her. If Chloe struck her, the physical evidence would be undeniable. The police would see the wounds. They would see the struggle. Sarah stopped fighting for a moment, bracing herself. "Go ahead," Sarah gritted out, her eyes locking onto Chloe's. "Do it. Show them who you really are. Strike me. I want you to." Sarah felt a strange sense of victory. If Chloe used the letter opener, the narrative of the unstable victim would crumble. The police would arrive to find Sarah bleeding and Chloe holding the blade. It was a trade Sarah was willing to make. Pain for truth. She closed her eyes, waiting for the bite of the metal. Chloe smiled. It was a slow, beautiful, and utterly horrific expression. "Oh, Sarah, you still don't understand how this works, do you?" Chloe didn't lunge at Sarah. Instead, she shifted her grip on the letter opener, holding it like a pen. With a quick, surgical motion, she drew the blade across her own forearm. Blood, bright and shocking, blossomed across Chloe's gray sleeve. Sarah's eyes flew open. What are you doing?" Chloe didn't answer. She grabbed Sarah's limp, shaking hand and forced her fingers around the handle of the letter opener, pressing Sarah's palm firmly against the silver hilt. She held it there for a long, agonizing 5 seconds, ensuring the grip was perfect, the prints unmistakable. Then, Chloe threw the letter opener across the room. It skittered under the server rack. "Help!" Chloe suddenly screamed, her voice cracking with a perfect practiced terror. She slumped against the wall, her face contorting into a mask of agony. "Sarah, please, put it down. I just want to help you." Sarah backed away, her hands held out as if they were covered in poison. No, you're insane." "The police are in the driveway, Sarah," Chloe whispered, her eyes cold even as her voice sobbed. "And they're going to find me bleeding, with your fingerprints on the weapon." Who do you think they'll believe? The woman who has spent 10 years caring for an orphan, or the girl with a documented history of dissociative gaps and accidental fires? The sound of sirens grew louder, the blue and red lights reflecting off the rain-streaked windows. Chloe began to wail, a high, thin sound of pure victimhood. Sarah looked at the server screen. 42%. The connection was still dead. The evidence was trapped, and she was standing in a crime scene Chloe had just perfectly staged for her arrest. Sarah felt the world tilt. She had tried to be smart, tried to use the truth, and Chloe had turned that truth into a noose. Chloe moved to the server console, her movements fluid despite the blood dripping from her arm. She typed a quick sequence of commands. "And let's make sure there are no more imaginary logs for you to obsess over," Chloe said. The screen flashed. "Remote wipe initiated." Sarah watched in numb despair as the file count began to drop. 10,000 files. 5,000, 0. The folder containing the journal photos, the Yale letter, the offshore accounts. It all vanished into a digital void. The screen went blank, reflecting Sarah's own hollowed-out face. "Everything is gone, Sarah," Chloe whispered, her voice thick with fake tears as the heavy thud of boots sounded on the front porch. "You're all alone now, just like you were in the fire." The office door burst open. 3 police officers rushed in, guns drawn but lowered as they saw the scene. Chloe was slumped on the floor, clutching her bleeding arm, her face wet with tears. "She's in the corner," Chloe shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Sarah. She snapped. She found a letter opener and I was just trying to get her to take her medicine. The lead officer, a man with a stern face and a name tag that read Davis, stepped toward Sarah. Sarah recognized the name. This was Michael's brother. "Sarah Johnson?" the officer said, his voice cautious. "I need you to step away from the desk and put your hands where I can see them." Sarah stood frozen. Her mind was a white roar of static. She looked at Chloe, who was being tended to by another officer, her wounds being wrapped in sterile gauze. Chloe caught Sarah's eye for a split second, and in that moment, the mask slipped. She didn't look hurt, she looked triumphant. But Sarah wasn't the careless child anymore. She was a graphic designer, and a designer knew one thing above all else. You never, ever trust a single save. "Officer Davis," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. She didn't move her hands. "I need you to look at my phone. It's on the desk." "Sarah, don't move," Davis warned. "I'm not moving. Just look at the screen. I'm a freelancer. I work with massive files every day. My software is set to auto-sync every capture to a public cloud server the second it hits the local drive." Chloe's crying stopped abruptly. She sat up, her eyes darting toward the phone. "The storm killed the house internet," Sarah continued, her gaze fixed on Chloe. "But my phone has a separate, dedicated satellite uplink for my design work. It's slow, but it's persistent. It doesn't need the server." She gestured toward the phone. Officer Davis picked it up. On the screen was a simple progress bar from a cloud storage app. It was at 100%. "Those are photos of a journal," Sarah said. "Dated entries from 20 years ago. They detail how Chloe Miller planned the fire that killed my parents. And if you scroll down to the last 5 minutes, you'll see the burst mode photos my phone took when Chloe grabbed the letter opener. It captured her slicing her own arm while I was pinned against the desk." The room went silent. The only sound was the rhythmic click-whir of Sarah's voice recorder. Officer Davis scrolled through the images. His face went from cautious to grim. He looked at the photo of Chloe, teeth bared, holding the blade to her own skin while Sarah's hands were clearly visible, empty and pressed against the mahogany. "Officer," Chloe started, her voice faltering. She's manipulated those. She's a designer. She can make anything look... These are time-stamped and encrypted by the cloud provider, Ms. Miller," Davis said, his voice cold. "And they were uploaded 10 minutes before we even got the call." He turned to the other officers. "Cuff her." The transition was violent and swift. Chloe went from victim to predator in a heartbeat. As the officers pulled her up, she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She lunged toward Sarah, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You think this makes you whole?" Chloe spat, the officers struggling to hold her back. "You think you're saved now? You're nothing without me. I made you. I wrote your entire life." Sarah stood her ground. She looked at the woman who had been her sister, her mother, and her jailer for 2 decades. "You didn't make me," Sarah said quietly. "You just tried to erase me. But I kept the logs, Chloe. I kept the time." As they led Chloe out of the room, she leaned in close to Sarah, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "You want to know why? You want to know why I did it? Your father? He wasn't the saint you remember. He had a whole other family. My mother was the one he left behind, the one he let starve while he bought you velvet hat boxes. I didn't just want your life, Sarah. I wanted to see you burn the way we did." Sarah didn't respond. She didn't give Chloe the satisfaction of a flinch or a tear. She simply watched as the heavy oak door closed behind the woman who had defined her world. The house was quiet again. The funeral music had stopped when the power finally died for good. Sarah sat on the floor of the office, surrounded by the wreckage of her life. She picked up her orthopedic cane, the cold metal feeling lighter than it ever had before. She looked at her childhood bear, the one with the camera hidden in its eye. She reached out and gently closed the lid of the hatbox. The mystery was solved. The monster was gone. But as she sat in the dark, Sarah realized that the strength she had used to survive wasn't a gift from Chloe. It wasn't part of the care or the protection. It was the only thing in the house that hadn't been a lie. 3 months later, the air smelled of salt and wild pine. Sarah stood on the balcony of her new apartment in Cannon Beach, Oregon. The Pacific Ocean stretched out before her, a vast, indifferent gray that felt more honest than the manicured lawns of Westchester ever had. Her new place was small, just a studio with a drafting table and a single comfortable chair. There were no hidden cameras, no smart home systems, no lavender oil. She walked to the windowsill and placed a framed photo of her parents next to her sketchbook. They looked happy, their smiles frozen in a time before the smoke. Sarah touched the glass, her fingers steady. She still had the limp. She still used the digital recorder. Kitchen, 8:02 a.m., making coffee. But the fear was different now. It wasn't the fear of losing time. It was the habit of a woman who knew the value of her own story. She opened her sketchbook to a clean page. She wasn't designing logos for corporate firms anymore. She was drawing the coastline, the jagged rocks, and the way the mist clung to the trees. Her life had been a fabrication, a masterpiece of ash and lies. But as the sun began to break through the Oregon clouds, casting a pale gold light across the water, Sarah realized she was finally the one holding the pen. And for the first time in 20 years, the next page was blank. The end